Hey, welcome to the Social 333 podcast. I'm your host, Chris Bentley. Today, our guest is Stephen Yearout. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Excited.
Thanks for coming on. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your background.
Um, my name is Stephen Yearout. I'm a father of three, um, entrepreneur. I've had my own IT company since 2000, um, and now I run a podcast myself called Empower Dyslexia, and we empower parents, educators, and others about learning disabilities and helping them become that better partner in education, which is one of our taglines, getting them to understand what is your responsibility as a parent, what is the child's responsibility as a student, and then what is the district and employees' responsibility. So,
Nice. I know we were kind of talking offline a little bit about like the advocacy of what you do and getting more people involved and talking more about. I know you said you were just down in Austin. Like, kind of go into a little bit about that and like what you're trying to do and trying to get more people involved and have more, I guess, shine a brighter light on it.
well, when we're talking about the education system, especially K-12, um, we've known that there's a problem with special education in getting services. Especially in Texas, we did things a lot differently than the rest of the country and pretty much the rest of the world when it came to servicing children with dyslexia. Typically, that would fall under special education, or the law that really governs that is IDEA, and that comes from the federal law. And then we also get ADA, Americans with Disabilities. So if you're under special education, you get protection under both laws. The way that we did it here in Texas is they moved you into 504, which is ADA, Americans with Disability. So ADA, just to give us a little bit of history, was really in the education system was developed for accommodations. You understand what that means? Accommodations versus remediation or actual therapy.
Yeah, just go into it a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm sure some of the people in the audience really don't.
So when we look at the difference between accommodations are things like extra time, oral administration. For some students, they need a pencil grip. Even children in wheelchairs, they get accommodations. Sometimes they have to leave early, or if you have crutches or whatever. And then when you get into special education and we start talking about the actual services that you get, whether it's remediation for dyslexia or, you're getting therapies for autism, speech, OT, any of that type of stuff, all of that would fall under special education. So since like 84, they took dyslexia where it belongs under special education. They removed it because people didn't want the stigma of special education.
Oh,
So they removed it from underneath special education, put it under 504, and thinking that they were going to reduce a lot of the red tape, but it didn't. It actually, because you get less protections under the law, under 504, it actually harmed a lot of kids. There was a story back in 2000, I believe it came out in 2018. Houston Chronicle did it. It was called Denied. And what they uncovered was there was a unwritten cap for special education. So what they said is you couldn't have more than 8.5% of your total population in your district in special education.
wow.
So if you were 8.6, you were stuck out a lot of times. And, back then what would end up happening is TEA, Texas Education Agency, would, if they saw that you were above that threshold, they'd come in and do an audit. well, no school district wanted to have TEA come in and do an audit, so they kept that below that limit. Well, that means there were that many children who were denied services. That's the reason why the name named it denied. Well, then that article actually spurred a investigation from the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, and Texas was found the first state to be found in violation of not providing services, not providing initial evaluations. So we're also governed by a law called Child Fine, which says every student, K through second grade, should be tested and or identified for any suspected learning disabilities. So what would end up happening is a lot of these students, the child fine violation would go on, and they would just I like to call it kick the can education. You know, you didn't get it this year. Well, the next teacher will have to teach you to read. Well, then you know that stops about third grade. We call it the third grade wall, and the reason why we call it the third grade wall is because from K to third, you're learning to read. From third grade on, you're reading to learn.
Mm.
So that's why you start seeing these kids really coming out of the woodworks around third grade. You know, in just in the dyslexia side, we typically don't see a difference in race about the people are being identified. You don't see a difference in race, and you don't see a difference in gender. So what ends up happening is the little boys tend to get rambunctious and play around. Either they become the class clown, or they get, you know, behavior problems, get kicked out of school or get kicked out of class. The little girls tend to, you know, come shut down and become very quiet because they're watching what everybody else is happening to them, and they don't want to stand out. So they become very quiet. So they tend to go undiagnosed or unnoticed because, you know, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right?
Right.
So these kids get labeled the behavior problems. And what we are doing is trying to get people to understand that behavior is a symptom of a bigger problem. If you're just trying to eradicate the problem or the symptom, you'll never get to the actual cause, the root cause of what's going on.
Yeah, when we spoke, we were talking a lot about like just the sheer numbers of dyslexia and like just we were talking about like you were saying, oh, like I'm sure like tons of people, and out of those tons of people, I'm sure many of them are dyslexic, and I was like, and you're like, believe me, like talk a little bit about that.
So when you look at statistics around the identification of dyslexia, um, the kind of agreed upon percentage is about 20% of the population has dyslexia. Now, I've had conversations with doctors at UTMB that handle all the prison system mental health services, and they're saying they think it's closer to 30% at this point.
Mm.
But you know, bring up the prison system. Have you ever heard of the term pipeline to prison?
Mm-mm.
So in education, they talk about the pipeline to prison. And this is a direct correlation between literacy, education, and prison. I like to say that dyslexia feeds three places. It feeds prison, it feeds the graveyard, and it feeds poverty.
Mm.
Now, does that mean if you have dyslexia, you're going to be in one of those three? Absolutely not. However, if you do not get the support that you need, and you don't get not just the support but the help, you know, the remediation piece of it, but if you don't have that good strong support structure around you, we see it time and time again that those are the paths that you take, and you know the data supports it. When we look at the prison study that was done in 1999 from UTMB, they showed that 89% of all Texas inmates are functioning illiterate.
Wow.
Can't read, can't spell. And again, does that mean just because you can't read and spell, you're going to end up in prison? No. But what it does is limit your opportunities for employment. And then of that 89%, they found that 50% of them were dyslexic.
Mm.
So when I started really diving into numbers, being from an IT background, Texas has a system called PIEMS. It's a public education information system. All the districts have to report back into this PIEMS database. So it's everything from total population, all the areas around population of your district, pass rate, special education, homeless, all of those type of categories. And it's publicly available. So we can actually go there and look. Some of the data is a couple years old, but you can get a pretty good idea. Back when I first started advocacy, I started looking into numbers. I mean, that was the first place to look. You got to look and see, how bad is this? Back in 2016, 17 timeframe, I pulled down every piece of data out of PIEMS that I could possibly get and started doing analysis on it. Back then, we had 5.5 million kids, and 20% of that is what? What number is that?
What? 20% of 5?
You're looking at somewhere close to 900,000 kids.
Wow.
Almost a million kids. At that point, Texas had only identified 120,000 kids.
Mm.
I mean, that's a staggering number.
Mm-hmm.
900,000 kids is more kids than some states actually have in their entire population in their school. And then there's some kids or some states that it's almost their entire state.
Yeah.
And these kids are they're not missing. They're just not looking. They try to say that dyslexia is a hidden disability. It's not hidden. You're just not looking.
That's something that I was going to ask you about. So I worked at a couple of different jobs, and just like everybody else, right? And one of the things that I noticed, and even now, because I sell real estate or I'll have them fill out a form or something like that, is the number one thing that they tell me is just summarize it. Like, I can't be bothered to read that, or like it's too long. And inside my head, I think to myself, is it that they cannot read, or is it that they have problems reading? And like, is there, I guess this is like more of the test situation. Like, do they have to have some sort of test saying, hey, look, like, this person just has an issue with reading because they have dyslexia and they're turning letters around? Or is it like they just cannot read at all? Like, they see that there's letters and they see that there's words on paper, but they cannot move past maybe like an entry or elementary level education.
So, great question. You really, to understand that question, you have to ask, what is dyslexia?
Okay.
Right? For years and years, everybody's heard of dyslexia, and then they think the first thing they think of is what? When you hear the word dyslexia, what do you think?
Just like they cannot read, or they turn letters around, or
reversing letters,
right.
reversing numbers, doing
don't quite understand it.
Right. So there's a couple different areas that from the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Manual for Mental Health, it defines dyslexia in 3 different areas. So phonemic awareness. Have you ever heard that word?
Mm-mm.
So you've heard the word phonics before, right?
Right.
So I believe I'm a little bit older than you. They were still using some phonics. They were getting into what was called whole word back then, but they removed phonics from our school. Well, phonics is the second floor. We'll call it the first floor. phonemic awareness is the foundation. So if you can't understand the changes in sounds, you'll never be able to understand how to sound it out.
Mm-hmm.
You'll never be able to understand how to actually pronounce words. You've heard people say, "I'm going to be specifically clear with you. Let me be specifically," or let me be. I'm frustrated, right? Well, that is a phonemic awareness problem, and it has to do when language is developed. It's developed in multiple ways. Do you have kids?
I don't.
Okay. So when we look at how language is developed from a toddler, from a baby, you're holding your brand new baby and you're sitting there and you're talking to them and they're looking in your eyes and you think that that's all they're doing is just looking at your eyes. Really, what ends up happening is they're watching your face. So what these children are doing is they're going to start imitating you. So that's where the babble comes from, because they're trying to imitate you. So language actually is developed first in the ears and then the eyes, because I'm watching you. And then it's kinesthetic. So it's the mouth and it's the tongue. So to give you a good example, if I say, if I do this, watch my lips. If I say the sound "b," I want you to say it.
The sound "b."
Okay, what'd your mouth do?
The same thing that you did.
Well, describe it to me.
Just kind of like a in and out kind of.
What'd your lips do?
Went inside to come back outside.
Did they stay there?
No.
So we got to give it a name, right? So would we call that a lip blower or a lip popper? What do you think would be a better name?
Probably a popper.
Popper, because that's what your mouth is doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if I go, say the sound, I want you to say it. I want you to say the sound that a D makes.
D.
The sound.
Oh.
Duh.
Duh.
Okay, so say it again.
Duh.
So what did your mouth do? What'd your mouth do? What'd your tongue do?
My tongue went to the top of my roof of my mouth and then like came down.
Okay, so it didn't stay there.
Right.
It touched it and came back down, right? So would we call that a wind sound, or would you think that the more appropriate name would be tongue tapper?
Tongue tapper.
Tongue tapper, because that's what it did, right?
Right.
So the two letters that people say that dyslexics mix up all the time is B's and D's. But I just showed you that you can't mix them up.
Right.
Because your mouth is doing something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
So that is where language starts. So where you start getting into the phonemic awareness piece of it is if I tell you, I want you to say the word cat.
Cat.
Now I want you to say that same word, but I want you to leave off the k sound.
Mm-hmm.
What's the word?
Cat. Cat. Tat. I don't know.
So the word is at.
At.
That is a phonemic awareness issue.
Mm.
So if you can't, and what we're doing there is you're thinking about the word, you heard it, you got to hold it in memory. You have to break it apart,
Mm-hmm.
put it back together, and then tell me the word. That is all the steps that are happening. But to somebody without dyslexia, it just happens naturally.
Right.
So that's the base, that's the foundation piece of it, right? So then we start building up on all of the other language acquisition activities that you need to do in order to get more fluent in your reading. So what ends up happening, like you said, you have customers that say, just give me a summary. I don't want to read it all. That's avoidance type behavior, right? People don't realize that that is very painful. You're constantly being asked to do something that is your quote unquote disability. You show up at a doctor's office. What do you have to do? You got to fill out paperwork. You go to a job interview. I got to fill out an application. If I can't read at a high level and I can't spell at a high level, I can't do any of those things,
Mhm.
right? My disability shows up. That's why I'm not afraid of the word disability. It doesn't mean inability. It doesn't mean I can't do anything in life. I can't be successful anywhere in life. It means in this specific area, I have a disability. Now, the great thing is you can be taught to read and spell like a non-dyslexic at any age. I went through remediation at 45 years old,
Wow.
and it it literally was the first week of remediation, and I was so angry
Mm.
because I said, "What if somebody would have taught me this way from the beginning?
Yep.
How different life would have been."
Right.
The general public don't look at. I mean, I don't fault them for it because you can't understand what you haven't lived or gone through,
Right.
right? Um, they don't understand that the disability doesn't start and end at the schoolhouse.
Right.
It flows into every aspect of your life because you can't read and spell. Typically, you don't have a higher level language skill. Your communication tends to be poor at best. So if you can't communicate well, what do you think that's going to do to your relationships, your
Mhm.
wife or your husband or your kids,
It
right?
usually leads to misunderstandings.
A lot.
So I'm kind of going through something like that where I have a friend of mine that has an issue with they had like homeschooling
Hmm.
and they just don't quite sound out words. So they'll just kind of improvise.
Hmm.
And I'll be like, no, 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 like that's not what it is. And I'll like sound it out, I'll spell it out in a way that makes them, I think, would be very simple. But for them, it's very complex. And I have to like kind of take a step back and be like, okay, let's redo the phonic part of it and spell it out using the words and kind of get it there so you understand. Because I could say something and that person may only get a couple of words out of that sentence and have a complete misunderstanding of what I'm talking about. And then the whole thing just grenades. And they think that I may be saying something bad or derogatory towards them or like shaming them or doing something that's like, and then all I'm doing is asking them a question or, doing something that's very, very easy. And I think that's where a lot of the miscommunication sometimes could be with somebody else.
Yeah. Um, to that point, people don't understand just the simple. How many times have you heard somebody say, "Just sound it out"? I like to tell people that's the same thing, really the same thing as going to somebody in a wheelchair and go, "Just run a mile. Just give it some effort. Just try harder." And if you physically can't determine when sounds change in a word, there is no way that you're going to sound it out.
Right.
You're going to learn like I did originally, growing up in school. I learned to read by sight, by
Memory.
memorization of
Mhm.
what the word looked like. I know that cat looks like that,
Mhm.
right? But you find me a word like one of the words that we were using during my remediation was oblige. Oblige. I've used the word, understand what it means. I've never seen it on paper.
Mm.
So when I saw it, I was like, I have no idea what that word is. And, you know, if you don't address these things when the child is younger, you'll hear this a lot that if you catch them earlier, you test them, you find them, identify them, and get them remediation earlier, it works better.
Right.
There's no scientific proof to that. However, what is what they're missing, let me say it that way, is that what you're not having to do is you're not having to deal with all of the social and emotional piece of it.
Right.
So while you're sitting there saying, "Hey, let me break this down into phonics, and we're gonna work this word out," right? Um, to them, they've done this their entire life, and it's just one more person sitting in front of me that's trying to tell me that, "Hey, we're gonna do this a different way," and thinking that they're helping, and they generally want to help,
Mhm.
right? However, they just can't understand that I physically can't determine which sound is where and where it goes. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah, that's really good. That person I was speaking about, like, it's I feel it's the same way. Like, I am in my heart, I am very much trying to help that person,
Mhm.
and I feel like even and I have a great memory, and I think, that was part of the thing when I was younger was I'd be like, "Oh, yeah, that's a cat. Yep, cat. I've seen that a million times." Um, and then when it got to spelling out catastrophe, right, for, like, the spelling bee, I would be like,
Yep.
and I got the cat
Breaks.
part down. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So definitely feel you on that. Talk a little bit about the 20% campaign that you got going on and a little bit about, where that's headed.
So this really came about from being in ARD meeting. So in special education, you have what's called an ARD meeting, and it's a committee made up of school representatives, like at the admin level. Then there's some teachers, there's diagnosticians, the speech therapist comes in. Obviously the parents are there, and then a lot of times advocates will have to come in to help guide the conversation. Um, a Something to me that is just completely unacceptable is a lot of times they'll have goals. So if you, let's say for dyslexia, your one of your goals is to read a paragraph or whatever 80% correctly 4 out of 5 times. So really, that 20% is what's missed in that 20%. So you actually hit on this earlier. If your friend that is you're trying to help read, or you're trying to help them understand what it is, if they can't understand, or if they're missing that 20%, they'll never get the full meaning of what you're trying to say,
Mhm.
or read to them or whatever. Um, but this is even more than that, right? So meaning is lost, context is lost, the child is lost. While we're looking at this result, right? I want to drive this result. We're not looking at the child anymore. Special education has moved away from being child first, meaning every decision that we make, or just like this table right here, every decision we make around this table, the first thing that we ask should be, how does this affect the child?
Mm.
That's child first.
Right.
And we don't see that. We see what's best for the district first, what's best for our staffing. And then, at the very end or the very bottom, it's, well, the child will get what they get. That's not okay.
Right.
So again, that 20%, what's being missed? What are we throwing away, if you want to say that, in that 20%? And now the other piece where correlation to this is 20% of the population is dyslexic.
Mhm.
So what is missed? That 20%. How can you, as a United States citizen, have have you go to vote, right? That's our civic duties, going voting. But how can you be an informed voter if you can't take in more information in different mediums?
Right.
Now you're taking away every other opportunity for me to gain this knowledge, because I can't read. So
Mhm.
now all I have to be able to do, or all I can do, is listen or watch a video. Thank God we're in a time now where that's readily available everywhere. There was a time that it wasn't.
In my time.
I mean, back when I was in school, they used to send you a tape recorder
Mhm.
with tapes
Mhm.
to if you had dyslexia or you got book on tape.
Mhm. I remember that. Definitely remember those days. Stephen, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Tell everybody where they can find you if they want to get some more information on dyslexia and the great programs that you have available.
Um, you can find our podcast on anywhere where you download your podcasts. We're on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, you name it, we're there. And, if you have any questions or need help or need an advocate or, we're here to help you make sure that you have the most relevant information, and that you yourself can go in and advocate for your child appropriately, because nobody's going to advocate for your child like you are. You hear that mama bear, papa bear type thing, right?
Right.
You can pay somebody to come in, but they're not going to have as much drive as you are. So I really appreciate the time here, and this getting this message out more and letting people know that, hey, this help and services are out there. We'll help you in any way we can.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being on the show. Appreciate it. You have a great
Yeah.
one.
Thanks.